Welcome to the Quiet Archives. Let us step back in time together to narrations of forgotten manuals and documents from the early 20th century, brought to life with authentic vintage footage. If you enjoy these retellings from the archives of history, please like and subscribe. And so, we begin. Simple Sabotage Field Manual, Office of Strategic Services, OSS Reproduction Branch, Strategic Services Field Manual, Number 3. Specific suggestions for simple sabotage. It will not be possible to evaluate the desirability of simple sabotage in an area without having in mind rather specifically what individual acts and results are embraced by the definition of simple sabotage. A listing of specific acts follows, classified according to types of target. This list is presented as a growing rather than a complete outline of the methods of simple sabotage. As new techniques are developed or new fields explored, it will be elaborated and expanded. Buildings, warehouses, barracks, offices, hotels, and factory buildings are outstanding targets for simple sabotage. They are extremely susceptible to damage, especially by fire. They offer opportunities to such untrained people as janitors, charwomen, and casual visitors, and, when damaged, they present a relatively large handicap to the enemy. Fires can be started wherever there is an accumulation of inflammable material. Warehouses are obviously the most promising targets, but incendiary sabotage need not be confined to them alone. Whenever possible, arrange to have the fire start after you have gone away. Use a candle and paper combination, setting it as close as possible to the inflammable material you want to burn. From a sheet of paper, tear a strip 3 or 4 centimeters wide and wrap it around the base of the candle 2 or 3 times. Twist more sheets of paper into loose ropes and place them around the base of the candle. When the candle flame reaches the encircling strip, it will be ignited and in turn will ignite the surrounding paper. The size, heat, and duration of the resulting flame will depend on how much paper you use and how much of it you can cramp in a small space. With a flame of this kind, do not attempt to ignite any but rather inflammable materials, such as cotton sacking. To light more resistant materials, use a candle plus tightly rolled or twisted paper, which has been soaked in gasoline. To create a briefer but even hotter flame, put celluloid such as you might find in an old comb into a nest of plain or saturated paper, which is to be fired by a candle. To make another type of simple fuse, soak one end of a piece of string in grease. Rub a generous pinch of gunpowder over the inch of string where greasy string meets clean string. Then ignite the clean end of the string. It will burn slowly without a flame in much the same way that a cigarette burns until it reaches the grease and gunpowder. It will then flare up suddenly. The grease-treated string will then burn with a flame. The same effect may be achieved by using matches instead of the grease and gunpowder. Run the string over the match heads, taking care that the string is not pressed or knotted. They too will produce a sudden flame. The advantage of this type of fuse is that string burns at a set speed. You can time your fire by the length and thickness of the string you chose. Use a fuse such as the one suggested above to start a fire in an office after hours. The destruction of records and other types of documents would be a serious handicap to the enemy. In basements where waste is kept, janitors should accumulate oily and greasy waste. Such waste sometimes ignites spontaneously, but it can easily be lit with a cigarette or match. If you are a janitor on night duty, you can be the first to report the fire, but don't report it too soon. A clean factory is not susceptible to fire, but a dirty one is. Workers should be careless with refuse, and janitors should be inefficient in cleaning. If enough dirt and trash can be accumulated, an otherwise fireproof building will become inflammable. Where illuminating gas is used in a room which is vacant at night, shut the windows tightly, turn on the gas, and leave a candle burning in the room, closing the door tightly behind you. After a time, the gas will explode, and a fire may or may not follow. Water and miscellaneous. Ruin warehouse stock by setting the automatic sprinkler system to work. You can do this by tapping the sprinkler heads sharply with a hammer or by holding a match under them. Forget to provide paper in toilets. Put tightly rolled paper, hair, and other obstructions in the WC. Saturate a sponge with a thick starch or sugar solution. Squeeze it tightly into a ball, wrap it with string, and dry. Remove the string when fully dried. The sponge will be in the form of a tight, hard ball. Flush down a WC or otherwise introduce into a sewer line. The sponge will gradually expand to its normal size and plug the sewage system. Put a coin beneath a bulb in a public building during the daytime so that fuses will blow out when lights are turned on at night. The fuses themselves may be rendered ineffective by putting a coin behind them or loading them with heavy wire. Then a short circuit may either start a fire, damage transformers, or blow out a central fuse which will interrupt distribution of electricity to a large area. Jam paper, bits of wood, hairpins, and anything else that will fit into the locks of all unguarded entrances to public buildings. Industrial production, manufacturing, tools. Let cutting tools grow dull. They will be inefficient, will slow down production, and may damage the materials and parts you use them on. Leave saws slightly twisted when you are not using them. After a while, they will break when used. Using a very rapid stroke will wear out a file before its time. So will dragging a file in slow strokes under heavy pressure. Exert pressure on the backward stroke as well as the forward stroke. Clean files by knocking them against the vise or the workpiece. They are easily broken this way. Bits and drills will snap under heavy pressure. You can put a press punch out of order by putting in it more material than it is adjusted for. 2 blanks instead of 1, for example. Power-driven tools like pneumatic drills, riveters, and so on are never efficient when dirty. Lubrication points and electric contacts can easily be fouled by normal accumulations of dirt or the insertion of foreign matter. Oil and lubrication systems are not only vulnerable to easy sabotage, but are critical in every machine with moving parts. Sabotage of oil and lubrication will slow production or stop work entirely at strategic points in industrial processes. Put metal dust or filings, fine sand, ground glass, emery dust, get it by pounding up an emery knife sharpener and similar hard gritty substances directly into lubrication systems. They will scour smooth surfaces, ruining pistons, cylinder walls, shafts, and bearings. They will overheat and stop motors which will need overhauling, new parts, and extensive repairs. Such materials, if they are used, should be introduced into lubrication systems past any filters which otherwise would strain them out. You can cause wear on any machine by uncovering a filter system, poking a pencil or any other sharp object through the filter mesh, then covering it up again. Or, if you can dispose of it quickly, simply remove the filter. If you cannot get at the lubrication system or filter directly, you may be able to lessen the effectiveness of oil by diluting it in storage. In this case, almost any liquid will do, which will thin the oil. A small amount of sulfuric acid, varnish, water glass, or linseed oil will be especially effective. Using a thin oil where a heavy oil is prescribed will break down a machine or heat up a moving shaft so that it will freeze and stop. Put any clogging substance into lubrication systems or, if it will float, into stored oil. Twisted combings of human hair, pieces of string, dead insects, and many other common objects will be effective in stopping or hindering the flow of oil through feed lines and filters. Under some circumstances, you may be able to destroy oil outright rather than interfere with its effectiveness, by removing stop plugs from lubricating systems or by puncturing the drums and cans in which it is stored. Cooling systems. A water cooling system can be put out of commission in a fairly short time with considerable damage to an engine or motor if you put into it several pinches of hard grain, such as rice or wheat. They will swell up and choke the circulation of water, and the cooling system will have to be torn down to remove the obstruction. Sawdust or hair may also be used to clog a water cooling system. If very cold water is quickly introduced into the cooling system of an overheated motor, contraction and considerable strain on the engine housing will result. If you can repeat the treatment a few times, cracking and serious damage will result. You can ruin the effectiveness of an air cooling system by plugging dirt and waste into intake or exhaust valves. If a belt-run fan is used in the system, make a jagged cut at least halfway through the belt. It will slip and finally part under strain and the motor will overheat. Gasoline and oil. Fuel tanks and fueling engines usually are accessible and easy to open. They afford a very vulnerable target for simple sabotage activities. Put several pinches of sawdust or hard grain, such as rice or wheat, into the fuel tank of a gasoline engine. The particles will choke a feed line so that the engine will stop. Some time will be required to discover the source of the trouble. Although they will be hard to get, crumbs of natural rubber, such as you might find in old rubber bands and pencil erasers, are also effective. If you can accumulate sugar, put it in the fuel tank of a gasoline engine. As it burns together with the gasoline, it will turn into a sticky mess which will completely mire the engine and necessitate extensive cleaning and repair. Honey and molasses are as good as sugar. Try to use about grams for each gallons of gasoline. Other impurities which you can introduce into gasoline will cause rapid engine wear and eventual breakdown. Fine particles of pumice, sand, ground glass, and metal dust can easily be introduced into a gasoline tank. Be sure that the particles are very fine so that they will be able to pass through the carburetor jet. Water, urine, wine, or any other simple liquid you can get in reasonably large quantities will dilute gasoline fuel to a point where no combustion will occur in the cylinder and the engine will not move. 1 pint to gallons of gasoline is sufficient. If salt water is used, it will cause corrosion and permanent motor damage. In the case of diesel engines, put low flash point oil into the fuel tank. The engine will not move. If there already is proper oil in the tank when the wrong kind is added, the engine will only limp and sputter along. Fuel lines to gasoline and oil engines frequently pass over the exhaust pipe. When the machine is at rest, you can stab a small hole in the fuel line and plug the hole with wax. As the engine runs and the exhaust tube becomes hot, the wax will be melted. Fuel will drip onto the exhaust and a blaze will start. If you have access to a room where gasoline is stored, remember that gas vapor accumulating in a closed room will explode after a time if you leave a candle burning in the room. A good deal of evaporation, however, must occur from the gasoline tins into the air of the room. If removal of the tops of the tins does not expose enough gasoline to the air to ensure copious evaporation, you can open lightly constructed tins further with a knife, ice pick, or sharpened nail file, or puncture a tiny hole in the tank, which will permit gasoline to leak out on the floor. This will greatly increase the rate of evaporation. Before you light your candle, be sure that windows are closed and the room is as airtight as you can make it. If you can see that windows in a neighboring room are opened wide, you have a chance of setting a large fire, which will not only destroy the gasoline, but anything else nearby. When the gasoline explodes, the doors of the storage room will be blown open. A draft to the neighboring windows will be created, which will whip up a fine conflagration. Electric motors. Electric motors, including dynamos, are more restricted than the targets so far discussed. They cannot be sabotaged easily or without risk of injury by unskilled persons who may otherwise have good opportunities for destruction. Set the rheostat to a high point of resistance in all types of electric motors. They will overheat and catch fire. Adjust the overload relay to a very high value beyond the capacity of the motor. Then overload the motor to a point where it will overheat and break down. Remember that dust, dirt, and moisture are enemies of electrical equipment. Spill dust and dirt onto the points where the wires in electric motors connect with terminals and onto insulating parts. Inefficient transmission of current and in some cases short circuits will result. Wet generator motors to produce short circuits. Accidentally bruise the insulation on wire, loosen nuts on connections, make faulty splices and faulty connections in wiring, to waste electric current and reduce the power of electric motors, the power output, or cause short-circuiting in direct current motors. Loosen or remove commutator holding rings. Sprinkle carbon, graphite, or metal dust on commutators. Put a little grease or oil at the contact points of commutators. Where commutator bars are close together, bridge the gaps between them with metal dust, or sawtooth their edges with a chisel so that the teeth on adjoining bars meet or nearly meet, and current can pass from one to the other. Put a piece of finely grained emery paper, half the size of a postage stamp, in a place where it will wear away rotating brushes. The emery paper and the motor will be destroyed in the resulting fire. Sprinkle carbon, graphite, or metal dust on slip rings so that the current will leak or short circuits will occur. When a motor is idle, nick the slip rings with a chisel. Cause motor stoppage or inefficiency by applying dust mixed with grease to the face of the armature so that it will not make proper contact. To overheat electric motors, mix sand with heavy grease and smear it between the stator and rotor, or wedge thin metal pieces between them. To prevent the efficient generation of current, put floor sweepings, oil, tar, or paint between them. In motors using three-phase current, deeply nick one of the lead-in wires with a knife or file when the machine is at rest, or replace one of the three fuses with a blown-out fuse. In the first case, the motor will stop after running a while, and in the second, it will not start. Transformers. Transformers of the oil-filled type can be put out of commission if you pour water, salt water, machine tool coolant, or kerosene into the oil tank. In air-cooled transformers, block the ventilation by piling debris around the transformer. In all types of transformers, throw carbon, graphite, or metal dust over the outside bushings and other exposed electrical parts. Turbines, for the most part, are heavily built, stoutly housed, and difficult to access. Their vulnerability to simple sabotage is very low. After inspecting or repairing a hydroturbine, fasten the cover insecurely so that it will blow off and flood the plant with water. A loose cover on a steam turbine will cause it to leak and slow down. In water turbines, insert a large piece of scrap iron in the head of the penstock, just beyond the screening, so that water will carry the damaging material down to the plant equipment. When the steam line to a turbine is opened for repair, put pieces of scrap iron into it to be blasted into the turbine machinery when steam is up again. Create a leak in the line feeding oil to the turbine so that oil will fall on the hot steam pipe and cause a fire. Boilers. Reduce the efficiency of steam boilers any way you can. Put too much water in them to make them slow starting, or keep the fire under them low to keep them inefficient. Let them dry and turn the fire up. They will crack and be ruined.